Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are turning our attention to what you could call the absolute engine room of European research and innovation. I'm talking about Horizon Europe.
Right.
And for anyone who's keeping track of major science and tech funding on a global scale, this is, well, it's the program to watch.
It is absolutely massive, unintentionally so. I mean, the program's central genius, really, was creating this highly structured approach.
Okay.
So think of it as being meticulously organized around, predefined missions, these huge thematic clusters like dedicated silos for climate or digital health,
Yeah.
and incredibly detailed work programs that span years.
And that structure ensures every euro aligns with these big strategic political priorities.
Exactly. Which, on paper, is what a program of this size needs, right, to make sure public funds are well spent.
Okay, so let's unpack this immediately, because that structured approach is the entire tension we're exploring today. Our sources suggest that this very systematic structure, its biggest strength, is actually becoming its central limitation.
That's a real paradox of success.
Right. We're diving into the argument that this rigidity, it comes at a significant cost to Europe's long-term innovation potential.
It really does. By being so tightly managed and so focused on, let's say, predictable outcomes, Horizon Europe risks limiting the ability to quickly respond to those unexpected emerging challenges.
Whether they're technological or societal.
Exactly. And critically, it discourages the kind of bold, high-risk research that just doesn't fit a neat checklist. And that's the research that's ultimately responsible for the truly transformative breakthroughs.
That is exactly our mission here, to understand why the path to innovation, as the EU has paved it, might just be a bit too straight and too narrow.
Yeah.
If you look at the history of science, breakthroughs rarely happen when someone follows the instruction manual perfectly.
They never do. They emerge from unexpected intersections, from just pure curiosity or from ideas that initially seem, frankly, too weird to fit into a conventional framework.
And that's where the current model creates, a kind of friction for the people actually doing the research.
A profound friction, yes. By focusing so heavily on bureaucratic compliance and, thematic alignment, you risk suppressing that essential curiosity-driven science.
So if your idea is genuinely groundbreaking...
It often fails to fit perfectly into the narrow funding topics that are dictated by the clusters.
Okay, let's jump straight into the practical reality of this then. The cost of compliance and why this rigidity really constrains creativity. What does this look like day to day for, say, a scientist or a startup trying to get funding?
Well, the first and I think the most immediate issue is just the nature of the predefined calls.
Okay.
Imagine you have a revolutionary idea that bridges, say, neuroscience and quantum computing, a really novel intersection.
Right.
But the funding calls are structured so narrowly. Call A is only for advancing sustainable agriculture, and Call B is for optimizing digital infrastructure.
So there's nowhere to put it.
Exactly. Researchers are forced to distort their genuinely new proposals to sort of shoehorn them into these narrow topics. It actively filters out ideas that are interdisciplinary or truly outside the box.
So instead of being driven by scientific possibility,
Yeah.
researchers are just driven by bureaucratic necessity.
Precisely. It becomes a compliance exercise, not an innovation exercise. But even if they manage to navigate those narrow topics, they hit the next big wall.
Which is...
The sheer administrative burden. And we're not talking about simple forms here. We are talking about extensive, detailed reporting, compliance audits, lengthy processes that consume a staggering amount of time.
And, some reporting is obviously necessary for accountability, but how bad is this administrative burden, really? Does it actually pull researchers out of the lab?
Oh, absolutely. Think about a research team of 6. When a huge percentage of the principal investigator's time, plus dedicated resources from the grant, have to be spent on meticulous compliance paperwork.
Instead of on the actual experiment.
Instead of on experimental design or publication.
Yeah.
The net research output just drops. It's a huge drain and, frankly, a disincentive for world-class talent who might have offers from places with much simpler funding.
And the third major limitation you mentioned is the pace.
The pace.
This is where the gap between policy and technology can become almost absurd.
It is. We're dealing with these massive programs built on 7-year cycles.
7 years! That's an eternity in fields like AI or synthetic biology.
That is the crux of the slow adaptation problem. If a major game-changing breakthrough happens in, say, generative AI in year 3.
Or a new pandemic hits.
Right. The budget and the detailed work program for the next 4 years are essentially fixed. They lack any real mechanism to pivot quickly. By the time the next 7-year cycle starts, the technology you are meant to be funding is already obsolete.
So here's where it gets really interesting. If the current model is actively slowing down European innovation, what does a truly agile, flexible system even look like?
Well, to unlock Europe's full potential, the program needs to incorporate mechanisms that prioritize flexibility and responsiveness.
So a real structural shift.
I think so. The sources suggest something that mirrors best practices from, say, venture capital, where funding is iterative and based on progress, not just paperwork.
Okay, we've got a few key mechanisms suggested in the sources. Let's start with expanding open-ended funding streams. We already have a great model for this, right? The European Research Council, the ERC.
That's the gold standard. The ERC is investigator-driven. It trusts the scientist to know what the next important discovery is, regardless of what cluster it fits into.
So the idea is to expand that.
Substantially expand it, and introduce new, dedicated funding lines specifically for these exploratory, high-risk projects that don't need to align with a political mission. They just need to be excellent science.
That seems to immediately address the predefined call problem. But what about the slow pacing and the rigid deadlines?
That leads to the second mechanism, rolling submissions.
So no more deadlines.
Or at least not for everything. Think about it. Breakthroughs don't stick to an annual calendar. An idea hits when it hits. By allowing continuous proposal intake for certain open calls, researchers can submit when the idea is fresh.
And it avoids that big rush of submissions that must just strain the system.
Exactly. It reduces bottlenecks.
I can see how that speeds things up, but it doesn't quite solve the long-term thematic rigidity. If the world suddenly needs high-speed energy storage research, but the budget was fixed 4 years ago on solar panels, how do you pivot?
That requires the third mechanism, which is truly adaptive calls. So instead of work programs being fixed for years, the funding topics themselves are designed to evolve dynamically.
How would that work in practice?
You'd set up decentralized expert panels that review global and tech trends quarterly, not annually. If there's a major scientific leap, the funding criteria for the next round can be adjusted. It lets the program chase the frontier in real time.
So you shift from a static plan to a continuous feedback loop.
Yes.
And this idea of adapting based on progress, that links directly to the fourth mechanism, right? Milestone-based funding.
Exactly. This is where it starts to look a bit like a venture capital model. Instead of getting one enormous 7-year grant based on a theoretical plan.
You get it in stages.
Right. You get seed funding for phase 1, which is just about proving feasibility. If you meet those specific, agreed-upon milestones, a successful proof of concept, a viable prototype, then, and only then, is the next phase of funding released.
That sounds inherently more efficient. It mitigates the risk of sinking billions into a project that just isn't working out.
And it creates agility. If the initial phase works brilliantly, you scale it rapidly. If it doesn't, you pivot or you close it down early without this huge bureaucratic commitment.
Okay, so the final mechanism tackles the regulatory straitjacket head-on.
It does.
Innovation sandboxes. Define that for us, because it sounds a bit like policy wish fulfillment.
They're essentially designated ring-fence spaces. They could be physical or virtual, where academia, startups, and industry can experiment without the usual administrative constraints.
So you just lift the rules.
You temporarily lift or radically simplify them. It's about creating these zones of regulatory freedom to speed up experimentation, much like a financial regulator might create a sandbox for new fintech.
So if these 5 things, open-ended funding, rolling submissions, adaptive calls, milestone funding, and sandboxes, if they were all implemented, what's the big picture so what for Europe?
The so what is acceleration and attraction. A more flexible structure would just immediately accelerate disruptive innovation by removing all that red tape.
The speed bumps.
Exactly. And crucially, it would be a massive draw for top global talent, people who are seeking creative freedom.
And that's the core risk, isn't it? If the US or Asia offers easier, more agile funding for groundbreaking research, Europe just suffers a brain drain.
Precisely. By embracing this agility, Europe strengthens its competitiveness. And, maybe most importantly, you foster that true interdisciplinary collaboration. You increase the chances of just serendipitous discoveries.
So the things you can't possibly write into a grant proposal, but which end up changing the world.
Those are the ones.
Okay, that is the compelling vision. Now for the reality check. Because if these solutions are so clear, why haven't they been implemented already? What are the biggest barriers?
Well, the biggest initial hurdle is, ironically, rooted in the very success of the existing system: regulatory complexity.
Right.
These EU funding frameworks are built on decades of accountability and transparency requirements. They're there to protect public money.
Mm.
And you can't just wish those away.
They're non-negotiable from a political standpoint.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And linked directly to that is a profound political risk aversion. Policymakers, especially those watching public budgets, they want predictable, quantifiable outcomes. They need clear KPIs.
They want to be able to point to a clear return on investment.
Of course. And that preference naturally discourages investment in these high-risk, high-reward projects we're talking about. The very nature of disruption means a high chance of failure.
And no politician wants to explain why they spent €1 billion on 10 projects that, yielded no measurable result.
Even if that research created fundamental new knowledge.
And then there are the budgetary constraints. Introducing new flexible streams would mean reallocating resources within the current Horizon Europe budget.
Yes, and any reallocation faces stiff resistance. You have these powerful vested interests and industrial lobbies, entire sectors that have structured themselves around the existing clusters.
So taking money from a manufacturing cluster to fund a high-risk quantum sandbox.
Is a huge political battle, one the innovators don't always win.
But this isn't just about shuffling money, is it? It requires a fundamental shift in how people even think about research funding.
It's a massive cultural shift. You're moving from a compliance-driven model to a trust-based system. That requires a mindset change among the administrators managing the funds.
They have to accept failure as part of the process.
Yes, and among the researchers themselves who are currently incentivized to just play it safe.
That cultural shift leads right to another major challenge. Evaluation. If we're funding exploratory research where the outcome is uncertain, how on earth do you measure success?
Exactly. Traditional metrics, number of papers, patents filed, they just may not apply. You need new assessment frameworks, and critically, you need more visionary assessors.
People willing to back an idea based on its potential magnitude, not the certainty of its deliverables.
Right. Because failure in a high-risk project can be just as informative as success. But our current evaluation systems are not set up to reward that.
And circling back to that day-to-day pain point, the reporting burden, that remains a huge disincentive.
It creates a self-selecting feedback loop. Only researchers who are desperate for the funds or who have huge administrative staffs are willing to apply.
So you filter out the solo geniuses, the small, agile startup.
The very people who might have the most disruptive ideas.
So what does this all mean for Europe's standing on the global stage? It seems Europe has built these world-class foundations, but the structure itself now demands change.
It's a crossroads. The existing success has created this urgent need for an evolution, to shift the focus from the process of compliance to the pursuit of agility and risk-taking.
To empower the researchers.
That empowerment is the absolute key to maintaining a competitive edge.
So the ultimate goal is to empower researchers to pursue these bold ideas that just don't fit neatly into predefined boxes. The challenge isn't just changing the rules, it's changing that deep-seated culture of political and administrative risk aversion.
And if knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied, if it solves problems and creates new economic sectors, then we have to address this question. How do we successfully fund and govern discoveries when their final form, their eventual application, is inherently unpredictable?
That tension between certainty and discovery.
And that is the core issue that European funding has to grapple with going forward.